Thank you. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you may be. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Denise Damasio. I, along with Debbie Yu, we are the co-chairs of the Law Practice and Legal Department Management Task Force with the Tort Trial and Insurance Practice section of the American Bar Association. If you are not a TIPS member, I encourage you to go to our website and join. We've got fabulous committees, whatever your practice area is. I'm sure we have something for you, and it is just a fabulous group of people. Today we are continuing our Lunch and Learn series. Our topic today is returning to the office now or never. I can tell you in my organization, I get perspectives from lawyers that are across the board, and our program today is co-sponsored by the Practice Renewal and Reintegration Task Force, the Committee on Outreach to Young Lawyers, Solo and Small Firm Task Force, and the Women Trial Lawyers Committee. Our panel today will be headed up by Rich Williamson, who is with Robertson, Johnson, Miller and Williamson. And so I will turn it over to Rich to introduce his panel and the program, and thank you for joining.
Thank you, Denise. And thanks to everybody for being here, and particularly thanks to all of our co-sponsors that made this possible. I'm going to give a brief introduction of our various panelists, but what we're going to be discussing today are both challenges and hopefully opportunities for overcoming the decision that each firm needs to make on when and how its lawyers and staff will be in the office going forward. And so because of that, I think it would be helpful if each panelist, after I've given everyone a brief overview of our panel, I'm going to invite each panelist to explain their practice setting, their role in the firm, their firm size, and whether or not their firm is currently working entirely in person, entirely remote, or with some sort of hybrid format. So again, I'll turn it over to them in a minute, but to briefly introduce, we have Candace Chuck, who's with Prague, O'Donnell, and Gillett in Seattle, Washington. Christine Forsyth, who's with the Forsyth Law Firm in Atlanta, Georgia. And Lauren Podwell, who's with Bullivant Hauser Bailey in Portland, Oregon. I want to particularly thank our distinguished panel for being here. And I'd like to then start, I guess I'll turn it over to Candace and invite her to give a little bit more of her background and her current work situation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Candace Chuck. I am an associate attorney at Prague, O'Donnell and Gillett. I want to say there's probably about 25 attorneys in the firm. It's currently almost everyone's working remote or it's optional. So I'm in the office today just because, it tends to be easier when I have a quieter space to do things like this.
And Christine, how about you?
Hi, everyone. Christine Forsyth. I am with my law firm, the Forsyth Law Firm in Atlanta, although currently I am not in Atlanta. I'm at Amelia Island. But it's just myself and a legal assistant. We are actually back in the office now full time, but we still more have a hybrid structure. Sometimes we work from home depending on the situation, but for the most part, we are back in the office, Rich, fully up and running. In person, we've been attending hearings and mediations in person. So for the most part, we are in the office, but we do have a hybrid model as well.
Terrific. And Lauren.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So our law firm has about 75 lawyers. We have offices in Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco. Our office has been open for many months now, but just on a voluntary basis. We were closed for a period of time and had nobody in the office, but some administrative folks. But for quite some time now, we've been open purely on a voluntary basis. We probably have about, I'd say 10% of our lawyers that come in on a regular basis and staff. And I'll talk about this more later during the presentation, but starting on April 4th, we are going to start what we refer to as our 90-day pilot program. where folks are being asked to be in the office at least 2 days a week, longer if they wish to be. We're going to do that for 90 days and then reevaluate what our more permanent remote work policy should look like. More about that as we address that subject.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Again, as Denise mentioned, my name is Rich Williamson. I'm partner with Robertson, Johnson, Miller, and Williamson in Reno, Nevada. We've really been back in the office since we've been able to be back in the office. So really since, I guess, the summer of 2020. And one issue that I know we've confronted and I want to discuss with the panelists and sort of start our discussion is the challenge of hiring and retention in kind of this current environment and balancing in-person and remote working opportunities. I don't know about your various markets, but I know in Nevada, every single lawyer I talk to is overworked and understaffed. And it's been a really big challenge trying to recruit and find both new lawyers and new staff from a small employment pool and a pretty competitive employment pool on both sides. So I think, Lauren, that was almost the perfect segue. I'd like to turn it back to you to discuss any, I guess, challenges or opportunities you've had trying to hire with balancing remote versus in person.
Sure. Thanks, Rich. I think it is both challenges and opportunities. With remote work, our ability, a pool that we can hire if we're willing to have people work remotely is nationwide. Whereas before, it was pretty much our 3 market areas, the Bay Area, Portland, and Seattle. That's helping with our DEI initiatives in terms of expanding our pool, and it's helping in terms of the number of applications that we're getting. But the flip side of that is that we're vulnerable. As a small to mid-sized firm, I can tell you that a day doesn't go by in which even I or others in our firm aren't being solicited by recruiters or directly by folks that we know in other firms around the country. As Rich pointed out, there's a very strong hiring market, I think, nationwide right now at every level of our profession, whether it's lawyers, support staff, financial folks, whatever the case may be. By way of example, we've recently had a couple of our finance department people get picked off, if you will, by an LA firm. They can pay more. They are offering higher pay and benefits, in a Portland market in which wages are less than they are in LA. And they're offering those folks to go work full-time remote. Whereas our policy is somewhat up in the air. And I mentioned our hybrid policy. We're going to have a 90-day pilot program starting April 4th. We're asking everybody to come in 2 days a week, staff, attorneys, partners, et cetera, at a minimum, at which point at the end of the 90-day period, we're going to poll people and reevaluate what our permanent remote work policy will be. We didn't have a remote policy before COVID. Occasionally people would, for a variety of reasons, leave the area for short periods of time, and we would accommodate that, but we didn't have a policy. And we need a policy going forward. Our industry is not going back to 5 days a week in the office. That ship has sailed. So clearly we're going to have a remote work environment, but what's that environment going to look like? We've decided that we want to have some sort of policy in place, that simply letting everybody choose whether and when they're going to be in the office is just, while that adds a lot of flexibility, it also adds a whole layer of additional coordination issues. So we want our work teams to coordinate with each other, that they're in the office at the same time, and do this for 90 days, then step back and reevaluate that. Let me add one more thing on this. You know, I can't compete with higher wages that are being offered by New York and LA law firms, but I can offer a firm culture that perhaps they can't offer. You know, our firm's been around for 90 years. We've prided ourselves in firm culture. We're really a close group of people. Many of the folks in the firm, I've been there for 38 years, and many of our staff and attorneys have been at the firm for decades. We have very strong relationships, but we can't take advantage of that culture in terms of competition if we're in a full remote environment. And that's why it's really important for us to have people come back, and especially for new hires. I will admit that during COVID, we've hired over 50 people, attorneys and staff. And of those 50 people, 25% have already left. We've never experienced attrition like that before. And we've made all kinds of efforts to connect with people, but especially with new people, it's very difficult. If you already had existing relationships, then it's easier to, in a remote environment, to nurture and continue those. But bringing new people in, training them, and then creating those bonds and relationships that make people want to stay and feel committed to your firm, that's extremely difficult to do with new people in a total remote environment. And that's one of the other reasons why we're really encouraging people to come in, reconnect, and then we'll work out what our permanent long-term post-COVID, if there is such a thing, hopefully, policy will be.
Perfect, thank you. And I think then I want to look at the other side of that relationship. And Candace, I know you were hired during COVID, and so I'm hoping you can maybe provide some insight onto, as a relatively newer lawyer, what opportunities you liked and didn't like, whether you want all remote, all in person, or some sort of hybrid, and from your perspective, what works best for hiring and retention.
So I don't know how much I can add to the hiring and retention. I was brought on, I had, done in-person interviews, and then my start date was actually during the first shelter in place. So I remember emailing, the firm manager being like, hey, do you want me to show up? Do you just want to mail me the laptop? Like, how, do you want this to work? And I was, I think, one of the first people in the firm to have like a laptop to bring home, because everyone at that point was still bringing their desktops back. I also had interviewed with the intention and had asked to work remotely, at least part of the time. In Seattle, traffic is just really bad. And so, the thought being, I can actually just not go into the office and spend that extra 2 hours of time doing productive things that, could be work, or just like could be walking my dog. So that was also something that, I'd considered, and I had a work from home setup before. So I think that made the transition very easy. That being said, there was still definitely like a lot of effort just to connect with the other associates, especially those who had been there longer, like, who has a more like open door policy. You can ask questions too. And so that always, I think, takes more time than you expect, especially when, everyone is all of a sudden remote.
Yeah. And so I think it's an appropriate place to then kind of explore, have you found it challenging getting new work and being mentored and kind of finding your place in the firm with some of it being remote?
I don't think I've found those challenges. I tend to be someone who isn't afraid to just reach out, and I have always gone into it with this mentality that I know attorneys are really busy, especially those who are senior to me. So if I need to follow up, chances are they're really not going to be annoyed with it. And if they are, they'll let me know. And then I'll be like, okay, so, just let me know what kind of frequency you want with me to remind you. I think it's been really good for me to get generally ahead. I like talking to people, and I also like meeting them. So that I don't think was difficult, but I could understand and have heard from other people, especially, you know, there are people out there like within the full range of the spectrum who are like, yeah, I would just want to be remote the entire time. And so I could see that being harder for someone who's like, well, I've never actually seen my boss face to face. I've never like talked to my legal assistant. I mean, I've met my legal assistant, I think in person twice now, maybe 4 times. But that's, you know, within the past 4 years. So it's not that she and I don't have a great relationship, but yeah, it definitely takes getting used to and just, I think, more intentional effort.
Okay. And Lauren, I don't know about you, for me, I think maybe it's a deficit I've got, but I know some of the best way I work with people and collaborate with people is just sticking my head in their office, both with my partners and with associates and delegating work. And I find that easier for me, and I find it a challenge to have to, I guess, set up a meeting or remember and build up a list of things I want to talk to someone about for the next time we speak. Do you run into similar challenges, or has the hybrid model been working for you?
No, I mean, it's certainly a challenge. You know, just those interactions of walking by somebody's office and you know, chatting with them or hearing, you know, other people talking about a particular case or a particular issue and you know, getting involved in conversation. You know, our timing was amazing in that we remodeled, we built out 2 brand new offices, our Seattle office and our Portland office, that opened up weeks before COVID and everybody left. But, you know, we designed those offices with cozy corner spaces where people could just stop in with couches and you know, coffee makers, machines and stuff like that to talk about, you know, cases that they're working on or just have those interactions. And even for the month that we were in the offices before we left, you know, there was so much of that going on. I think those were the most popular spaces in the office. And it's hard to do that in a remote environment. And some people are better than others. I know one of my partners has regular meetings at certain times on certain days of the week with everybody on her team and in her practice group. And they just have coffee and as if they were going out for coffee, they do it from home and they talk about work, they talk about family, they talk about, you know, all kinds of different things. And it's a set schedule. You know, other people do it more spontaneously. And I'm curious to hear from Candace and from others, you know, which model works better. I'm always, you know, it's been a learning process, you know, how much is too much and how much is too little. You know, with our remote work environment, our home space and our free time and our work versus our personal time is kind of all merged together. You know, I kind of joke, I don't really know the difference anymore between Tuesday and Sunday, or between, you know, 8 and 5 and between 5 and midnight. It just is all kind of merged together. And I'd be curious to hear from others, you know, are they more comfortable having kind of set times so that there's boundaries and spaces, you know, between your personal and your work, or do they like to kind of leave it loose? What do people prefer and think works better?
I think that's a good question and a perfect way. I'd like to pull in Christine. Christine, I think 2 things, if you don't mind speaking to, both number 1, coordinating with your assistant. I know you mentioned you're both back in the office now, but did you face any challenges there working with staff when you're both remote? And then to Lauren's question, how have you been able, or when you were remote, were you able to balance the sort of home work and home being home? And now that you're in person, do the clients still expect you to kind of be on 24/7 regardless of where you are?
Thank you, Rich. And I started remotely, obviously, because I started the firm in the middle of the pandemic. And considerations to hire someone was difficult because I felt it would be better for training purposes for us to be in the same space. So when I did make the hire, we were meeting up together. Now for training purposes, we're for the most part in the office. And I will tell you, my legal assistant actually prefers to be in the office because she finds she learns better when we're in the same space. So we really do have to make a concerted effort to plan our weeks. So right now, she typically works from home 1 day a week. And we make sure that the tasks that she's doing while she's off are things that are more easily done remotely, following up on medical records, for example. But for the most part, we are in the office. She does prefer to be in the same space for training purposes. And also, I will say, I always give my clients the option of coming into the office. I find it 50-50. Some don't want to come at all. They don't want to see me. They don't need to see me. But I have had clients across the spectrum, younger, older, who actually do want to meet in person. And so I've had a lot of that happening as well. So, overall, I think we've been able to balance it well enough, but we are 90% in the office. She prefers it. I prefer it. And I will tell you, I prefer it because of Lauren's point. When I was completely at home, it was hard for me to separate work life from home life because I have a young child who's 7 and I'm balancing a million different things. And so when I'm home, I found I was doing a lot of the stuff that, the stuff that's required of me as a mom, and other things that just always seem to interfere with my work. And so I was finding that I was working until 2 a.m. in the morning sometimes after I put him down. So for me, it's been easier for me to separate. I go into the office while he's in school, I get what I need to get done. I still have the flexibility where if I need to leave in the middle of the day, I can, but I find I do work better in the office. And my assistant actually prefers to be in the office as well, which I know is not very common now. But I've also been flexible enough where she has to leave in the middle of the day. She brings her laptop home every day, particularly because we're still in the pandemic. And so you never know from day to day. She may get an email that her child was exposed to COVID and can't return to the office in the morning. So what we've done is she takes her laptop home every day. And that way, if we have to be flexible, have to reshuffle a few things, we've been able to make it work.
Perfect, thank you. And Candace, I guess, how about you? You mentioned one of the advantages was not being stuck in traffic and getting to stay home and work, but do you stay home and work too much?
No, I think I guess I'd gotten into the rhythm of I also have a designated home office. It's a separate room. If I'm not working, the door is closed and I don't go in there. And so I tried to set pretty strict boundaries, early on, being okay, I generally don't accept, kind of work-related calls after hours unless it's an emergency already, know about it, or we're trying to schedule something that's a little different, that requires working around office hours. But otherwise, I'll get up early, I'll do my work, but I haven't found that to be as much of a problem for myself. I know that's not necessarily the case for everyone, and I think it is helpful. But, I think that's person to person. I also tend to be someone who likes to come into the office, not necessarily, I don't think I'd be able to, I could do it every day if I needed to, but I think I appreciate a lot the flexibility that, working from home offers me. And, even when, let's say, things are normal, just having the flexibility to be okay, if I have a dentist appointment, I don't need to, figure out how I'm going to get back and forth, parking, busing, everything, that just adds so much when I can easily go home and just go back online. It'll save me, 45 minutes. And so I think just knowing that that is always an option is really helpful.
Okay. And one follow-up question before then I turn to the rest of the panel. Have you noticed a difference in your productivity levels from when you're at home versus when you're in the office?
Not really. I'd say maybe earlier on, when people were first starting to come back, it was actually more distracting for me to be back in the office because I'd want to go around and say hi to everyone. But really, I would say my productivity is about the same. I think it's also, I work with partners who know that I'm working if they don't see me in the office, and they don't necessarily need to be in the office to reach me. So I think just having a very open communication about hey, you can look at my calendar if you need to, but otherwise I'm happy to jump on a call whenever.
Perfect. Lauren, how about you? Have you noticed any productivity differences either, in yourself or with others in your team in person versus remote?
Absolutely. I've always worked a lot of hours, but I logged more hours last year than I ever have. And I think other than, years when I've had maybe, 5 or 6 trials in the year, there were no trials, or I had no trials this past year. So these were different kind of hours, those of us that are litigators. I mean, it's easy to fill up a timesheet when you're in 3 days of depositions. And we've had, we did do some remote depositions, but they're a lot more efficient in terms of travel, and also the depositions just seem to go quicker when they're virtual. At least that's been my experience so far. So so I've been busy with all kinds of other things, and I at firm wide, we exceeded our budget in both years of COVID in terms of our budgeted hours, and people are very busy, and the work keeps on coming in. I think our industry has been very fortunate during COVID as compared to many others in terms of work volume and ability to pivot and to work from home. As you started off, I think the biggest challenge now is hiring people. I don't know a managing partner in the regions that I work, or friends who are in firms around the country that aren't desperate to find lawyers, paralegals, legal assistants, office staff. Our industry is definitely, it has a shortage right now of person power. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that everybody has a ton of work. We talked earlier about, hiring remote. I think firms are going to have to decide, are they willing to hire somebody that is completely remote? Nowhere is near where your offices are. We're on the West Coast. Are we willing to hire somebody that lives on the East Coast, knowing that, they're very rarely going to be in the office? And if we do, let's talk about lawyers. Is that going to be a different track? I know I'm having a strategic planning session with my board coming up in a couple of weeks, and that's one of the things on the agenda. Do we create a new track, if you will, for fully remote attorneys? Is it possible to be a fully remote associate and to be on a shareholder track? Becoming a shareholder in a firm, you look at, both the legal abilities and professional involvements, but you also look at how they fit within your firm and your firm culture. Are we going to be able to evaluate that and develop the relationships such that people are going to want to vote in somebody that maybe they've never met and has maybe never even been in the office as a partner in their business, in their firm? I don't know. I don't know the answers to these questions, but they're things that I know we're going to be exploring, and I'm sure law firms and folks who are on this call today are thinking about and looking at, and if not, they should be.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And even if it's not by design, I mean, that's just sort of human nature, right? You develop a rapport with people you see, people you grab coffee with, you have a joke with. And so it is hard, even with the best intentions, to develop that level of rapport when it's all remote. Christine, before we move on topics, I just wanted to follow back up with you. You sort of discussed your assistant's productivity and her preference to be in the office. How about you? When you were working remotely, did you notice a difference between in person and in the office? And do you have a preference?
I did, Rich, and I felt also that I was working a lot longer hours when I was remote, particularly because of all the other things that are pulling on my time during the day. It was easier for me to, start the laundry or start making dinner and then work until longer hours in the morning because I'm a litigator. So the work still has to get done, regardless of when I did it. And for me, being in the office, I think, because I went back fully in January, where I'm in the office probably 90% of the time now, I'm better able to compartmentalize the work that I need to do while I'm there, zero in, I focus on it, I get it done, and then I can leave, pick up my son, do all the other things that I need to do. And then if I do need to get back on, I am finding since I've been back that it's not until 2, 3 in the morning as often as it was when I was at home completely. So for me, it's been better. Candace's trick about closing the door was actually mentioned to me by someone while I was remote, but for some reason I could never do that. It was right downstairs. So I would go back in the office and I would be working. And so I don't know, I think it's totally dependent on, like I think Candace said, it's person to person. You have to find what works best for you. And I found that works best for me. And as for my assistant, she was brand new to law. So for me to hire her, and it's someone that I knew, which actually helped because I knew her personally, but she's new to the law. So for training purposes, it's much easier for me to train her on what to be done when we're together. And we've had a lot of conversations about that. But again, I try to be flexible. If she has to leave, if she has to come in later in the day, we're very flexible and we're open with the communication. And I think that's important. And I've asked her a lot of times, do you prefer to be here? And some days she does want to work from home, and it's fine. We just have to make sure we coordinate and we plan, but it's easier to do that when it's just a 2-person team as opposed to Lauren's situation where you're trying to make it work for 75 and more people. I will also say too, I think it's different from a smaller firm perspective because of my clientele. They're individual people, and a lot of what I do as a plaintiff's lawyer is making these connections with my clients who have no experience with the law. A lot of them have never been in this situation before. And so they actually need more handholding. And I find a lot of them want to do that handholding in person as opposed to by Zoom or over the phone. So that's at least been my experience and my perspective, just from a smaller solo practitioner side.
Perfect. And now, just one quick follow-up on that, particularly since both the challenges of being remote and I think you mentioned that you started the firm. Have you found it a challenge to attract clients and network with potential clients in a remote setting?
To be honest, no. I've actually had the opposite happen, which is shocking because I tell a lot of people I started my practice in the middle of a pandemic. I've gotten a lot of my referrals actually come from other lawyers who've known me for a long time and have worked with me for a long time. And they've sent a lot of clients my way. But believe it or not, social media, I've had a lot of clients call me and said they found me on LinkedIn or they saw me on Instagram. And so I think the dynamic and the landscape of attracting clients has changed in that sense, because we are able to do some of that more remote, more remotely than we were in the past, because we've all gotten to the computers now. So I've gotten clients a lot from just other lawyers, people that I've known personally over the years. And now that we're actually back, because I'm in Atlanta and a lot of things are actually open now. We're doing hearings in some courts in person, mediations. I've done a couple of those in person. So I'm actually now meeting people and seeing a lot of people. And also, Rich, to answer your question, I'm in a shared space setup. And so at least in my building, there are a lot of different people coming in and out. So it's a lot more so than I would say last year, October. This year, I've seen a lot more people. And so I've actually interacted with a lot more people and been able to network that way also. So I'd say it's a mix.
Okay.
A lot of people are going to the LinkedIn and the Instagram, and social media marketing is working also.
Yeah, that's a good point. Candace, what about you? I know it depends on your individual practice setting, but I know I felt the need to sort of develop a book of business, develop relationships with clients, and sometimes being able to just sit in on a meeting was helpful. Have you found it a challenge to both build relationships with existing clients and network with potential clients with remote work?
I guess what I would say is networking has been different, but it's also been kind of easier because everyone was also remote for a good portion of time. So it meant that it was easier, to just set up a Zoom meeting. It meant that I could just, watch trial, and have that playing on a separate screen and being able to listen into some of these other arguments that I would have otherwise before had to go and physically sit there and not be able to do work or to have other things going on. So in that sense, I think it's been easier. I think there is a ton of value to in-person networking, in-person events, and having that be, a way to meet and develop relationships with clients. But I think too, it doesn't underscore the fact that, well, I sit on the communications and outreach and lawyers division for the King County Bar Association, which is regional. And so some of our most popular events have been the speed networking ones, because it allows people to meet so many different others without having to physically go there. And I know we'd always had problems before too, because sometimes people just have difficulties with finding parking or getting childcare or making time for those things when it's outside of the work office hours. So I think in that sense it's actually been really nice, and I think some of those things will stay too.
Good. Those are some good points I hadn't even considered. And I know I always tell law clerks before they leave of, make sure you spend as much time as possible in court watching trial, because you won't get that opportunity once you leave. You just pointed out that really that opportunity now is available to everybody, which I think is something great and everyone should take advantage of. Lauren, how about you? I mean, I know you have a pretty stable client base, but have you encountered any challenges or benefits with that sort of remote setting of client development?
I think so far, doing a remote interactions with clients has been fine, but I'm really interested to see how things work going forward. I think it's a lot different being in a remote environment in the middle of a pandemic when everybody's in the same situation, as opposed to when we get hopefully past this, and some people are working remote, some people are working in person, and that sort of thing. For those of us that are primarily in the insurance industry, things are not going to go back to the way they were. We used to do trips and go to the East Coast and stop in Hartford and stop in New York and stop in Atlanta and visit with groups of clients. Well, those people aren't in their offices anymore. Many insurance companies in particular have shut down their offices and people are working remote. So going and visiting at the home office that many of us have done through the years is simply not going to be the wave of the future. So we need to figure out how best to interact with those clients going forward, because those relationships are really important. I consider many of my clients friends. I have close relationships with them. They know my family, I know theirs. We drank together, eaten together. I mean, it's part of the deal. But that's changed. And I guess I'll give a plug for TIPS here, because I really think that associations like TIPS are going to be very critical going forward in terms of having those kind of interactions with clients. A lot of my clients are TIPS members, whether it's the Fidelity and Surety Law Committee or the Business Litigation Committee or some of the other committees that I'm actively involved with. And they come to these meetings. And, it used to be that I would see them in those meetings in addition to seeing them in their hometowns and in their home offices. And if that's not going to be available anymore, attending our meetings and arranging for those sort of interactions and maintaining those relationships are going to be critical. So think about that, going forward. And I know there's, a lot of firms have, cut back on their travel, and they've cut back on their marketing, supporting folks going to traveling for meetings. That might be a little bit short-sighted, I think, in terms of the long term, and continuing to build and develop those relationships and maintaining those relationships with clients and, in fact, other lawyers around the country. I mean, I've been in TIPS for a long time, and I can point to a lot of work that I've been able to, fortunate to get through referrals of friends through TIPS through the years, and then also, with the company people that I've maintained those relationships with. So I think that's important, and it will become even more important, and we should keep that in mind. And when we're, deciding where to make cuts and where to spend money on travel, et cetera.
And so I guess I want to make sure we leave some time for questions, but I wanted to ask each of you both kind of as a closing question, looking forward, say 2 to 3 years, both what do you see your own personal practice doing? And are you excited about that or fearful about that? So Christine, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Rich, and thanks for the opportunity to serve on this panel also. I am actually excited about the future in the next 2 years. I think we've gone through a grueling last couple of years, and we're hopeful that things will start to look up. For me, I see a hybrid structure with probably the majority of the time actually being in an office space, with flexibility to work from home when needed, to make provisions for childcare, and all the other activities that we need to do. As a solo practitioner, I also think, for me, networking has been key. And I've actually been setting up a lot of lunch meetings, with former coworkers, former people I used to work with, friends, just to keep that connection going, because that's what drives me. Actually, personal interactions, I find that I thrive off of that. And when I was more remote and more inside just by myself, that was difficult. It was difficult. So I'm actually excited about the future and, the opportunity to have that balance, because, I can have that balance for the most part with deciding when I have to go in and when I have to stay home. But going in works better for me, at least for right now.
Perfect. Thank you. Candace, how about you?
I am also really excited for the next couple of years. It just, to go to restaurants and have everything be more open. And I really enjoy meeting people. And so getting to, go to all of the events that have been canceled for the past 2 years, I think will be a lot of fun. And I'm really looking forward to it. I do also agree with Christine, though. I think a lot of it's going to be hybrid. I mean, I am a younger attorney, so a lot of my internships throughout law school were, I could just bring my laptop and do the work from home if I had to. So I think I see that staying, and I think I just look forward to the flexibility. I think it makes it easier I don't have kids personally, but I could see, if you have to pick up your kid or like, go home and take care of a parent or something like that, just being able to work around that schedule. So I do see it, being something as part of the future that I appreciate a lot. And I appreciate the firm that I'm at now too for, making it so optional, being like, you don't have to be in the office if you're not comfortable. And that has been really nice.
Perfect, thank you. And Lauren, I know you haven't completed your pilot project yet, so I'm going to make a guess anyway.
Well, as I said earlier on, the ship has sailed in terms of 5 days a week in the office. So, I mean, we will definitely have a hybrid, policy. I just don't know whether it's going to be 2 days a week, 3 days a week, or, how that's all going to work. But, that's just the way, our industry is going. There's mostly negative about COVID, but maybe one of the positive things that have come out of COVID is that it's kind of moved our industry forward by maybe 25 years into 2 years. I mean, I think the legal industry, like other professions, we're heading in this direction, but at glacial speed. And, we were forced to do it because of COVID, and realized that, wow, we really can do this and we can do it pretty well. So it's kind of forced change on the industry. But I think the industry is embracing it. I've always been fascinated by the business of law, and the business of law is changing. For us Trekkie fans, I've always talked about for TIPS, in the year that I'm going to be chair, as the theme being TIPS, the next generation. Like Star Trek, we've moved on to the next generation, and we're moving on to the next generation of lawyers and the practice of law. And it's going to look different than it did, 5 years ago, and way different, and every generation it's a little different. But I'm excited about it. I think our industry is ready to handle it. I think we have the technology to do it. I think that we have with the younger generation of very tech savvy lawyers. I think we're poised well for these changes. I think for older lawyers like myself, embrace it or get out of the way, because it's going to happen whether you like it or not. So be part of that change. But we don't want to forget our history. We don't want to forget our roots. We don't want to forget our culture. My undergraduate degree is in accounting, and I decided that I didn't want to be an accountant because I didn't want to sit, at a desk all day behind a closed door by myself, sharpening a pencil and playing with numbers. We need to be careful that we don't become, accountants by just, being isolated. There's so much to the practice of law. There's so much to the business of law that comes from personal interactions. So we need to find that right balance. I'm sure that we will. We'll stumble a little bit along the way, but I think we're going to do great. And, TIPS can be a very big part of it. And this lunch series, I think, is a very important part of our transition. So I want to thank all the sponsors and you, Rich, and everybody else and the panelists that have worked on putting this together. I think this is great, and looking forward to, I know there's more of this, another part of this program that's going to come up in a couple of months, and you'll probably mention that. And I'm looking forward to listening in on that and hearing what people have to say. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. No, and as Lauren mentioned, we will be having another follow-up program that I think now, it was originally going to be in May. I believe it will now be June 3rd, but stay tuned for that. It'll more focus on trial work and both preparing for trial remotely with remote staff, having to submit exhibits remotely, and just dealing with those logistics, and then either conducting in-person trials with that kind of hybrid preparation, or remote trials. But before we break, I wanted to open it up and make sure, I realize we covered a lot of ground today. Obviously, this is a big subject that every firm is going to deal with differently. Every lawyer is going to deal with differently, and it is absolutely not a one-size-fits-all approach. So we try to really provide a big broad perspective, but I'm sure we miss things. So please, if anyone has any questions or would like to explore any topics, please speak up. We invite your questions. Okay, I've got Bob Hirschon shaking his head at me. So I guess we don't have a question there, but we'll allow a few minutes for some questions to come in. I just kind of, I guess, wanted to open it up to Candace, Lauren, Christine. Any advice that you can provide to either someone new coming into the practice, facing a remote or a hybrid situation, or for existing firms that are struggling with how to best implement this for them, their staff, and their clients?
Sure, Rich, I'll add, before I went on my own, I was in-house with an insurance company and worked with a lot of lawyers. I was able to have those, water cooler catch-ups or meet in the break room. Have been to this day some of my best friends, former coworkers who I was able to have that interaction with and build those relationships with. And for me, I honestly don't, I think if you're going to be remote, you do have to make a concerted effort to get together and actually interact with people one-on-one, because it can be very isolating. I know we've talked a lot in our reintegration task force meetings on the mental challenges that a lot of attorneys have faced during the last few years because we're by ourselves and because we're in our heads, and not the opportunity to network and get to really know people. There've been challenges with law students who have never really worked around other lawyers and have challenges moving into the profession. And so my advice would be to, try to make an effort to network with people, with younger lawyers in particular, with law students. Right now, I have a mentee who's in law school who shares with me her struggles of this remote environment. And I've been trying to get her connected with people just to start building these relationships. Because when you've been practicing for 10, 12, 20 years, it's a lot easier to navigate this space than for a lot of the younger lawyers. And so I think that's something that we really need to be cognizant of and try to make an effort to invite, people into that space, and also for our own mental sake, reach out and interact and build that relationship with different people.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. As I think Lauren indicated earlier, it's unclear. We've been able to weather it thus far, but the question is, how are these relationships going to be intact for 2, 5, 10, 20 years into the future? Lauren or Candace, do you have any other thoughts or recommendations?
Let me add to something that Candace said. I think that the senior people should not take for granted that the younger people know stuff, certain things that, and likewise, the younger lawyers, newer lawyers should not be bashful about asking. And I'm going to give you just a very quick example of this. A friend of mine who's a judge in Portland called me a couple of months ago and said, I was doing Zoom hearings today, and a new lawyer in your office appeared, did a fantastic job. But I wanted to let you know that this lawyer was wearing a t-shirt at the hearing. And he said, it won't have an impact on my ruling, but I know that, the Bullivan firm and I wanted you to be aware of this. And my initial reaction was, gosh, how can you be so dumb to, wear a t-shirt? And I was kind of disappointed in the associate. And I thought about it for a while, and I mentioned it to my wife, and we talked about it, and I came totally around to the other side of it. I said, how could we have been so dumb to have not talked with that lawyer about it in advance? It was our fault. We assumed that lawyer knew the proper dress on a Zoom call. That lawyer had never, we hired, it was a brand new lawyer, had never been into the office, had never gone to live court, had never been around us when we were, heading into court and that sort of thing. And, was incumbent upon us, the people with more experience, to communicate those sort of things that you learn, maybe not through words, but more through observation, because we don't have those same levels of observation in a remote environment that we had when we were in the office full time. So for those people who are more senior, don't take things for granted. And for those people who are new and more junior, don't be afraid to ask, because we have to find ways to communicate, verbally when we don't have the nonverbal communications that we typically had in the past.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Candace, how about you?
I guess I would just echo, first I want to say thank you for just, this opportunity to sit on this panel and to also listen to Lauren and Christine. I think a lot of it just, is the effort. A lot of associates will appreciate, any attempt at effort, even if it's not perfect. And there is so much to be said about the things that, nobody tells you. I remember the very first time I actually had to go to court and then talk to the clerk who I wasn't really sure and get extra copies of things. And nobody had told me that or I assumed that they would take credit card at least, but then I asked them if they took Venmo and she looked at me like I was crazy. So, any of that, all of that, just the little interactions, how to talk to a judge without falling over, especially for a very young attorney when I was just starting out. Those are so incredibly intimidating, and just the effort goes a long way, just starting that conversation and dialogue.
Perfect. All right. Well, hey, thank you. I want to thank our entire panel, Candace Chuck, Lauren Podwell, Christine Forsyth. Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful for everyone. I know at least it was helpful for me. And with that, I will turn it over to Denise.
Thank you, Rich. And I will echo your thanks to Candace, Christine, and Lauren for some fantastic information on how we continue to navigate these waters and to demonstrate our resilience as a legal community to do so. I want to thank all of the attendees. I also want to thank our co-sponsors, the Practice Renewal and Reintegration Task Force, the Committee on Outreach to Young Lawyers, Solo and Small Firm Task Force, and the Women Trial Lawyers Committee, as well as the TIPS leadership for all the support they give to us, and the TIPS staff for all the work that they do. If you are not a TIPS member, please, please, please go to the TIPS website and become a TIPS member. It is a beautiful family with a lot of information and great people to learn from. Appreciate you attending today, and please look out for more information on the second part of this, which is how we navigate the actual practice of law in the virtual world, coming up June 3rd. Rich, thanks for your great panel.
Thank you.